Okay. The first question I want to ask you, we're going to start our study on Africa today. I want you to think about the question, how big is Africa? Okay. I want you to come up with a way between you and your partner, person in front of you, person behind you, to come up with a description or a way in which we can answer that question, how big is it? Right? I like to use metaphors and make comparisons. Those type of things are really good in making us flex our mental muscles. Sound good? Take a moment, discuss that with the person in front of you, person behind you, your partner. How big is Africa?
Smaller than Europe. It's got multiple countries, right? Is that it's called? And then continents like the whole thing.
Yeah, so continents large scale, countries small scale. So like Africa, there's they call that Africa is not a country. There's probably a lot of people that have that similar kind of thought.
Alright, let's go ahead and discuss this together real quick. Cade, Mr. Gold, what did you guys come up with?
It's very big because there's a lot of countries there.
There's a lot of countries, so we know there's about 50 because you've already been readily studying for your map quiz already, right? Ms. Greta, what did you guys come up with?
We came up that it's really big because it's about 2/3 bigger than the U.S.
2/3 bigger than, what do you mean by 2/3 bigger than the United States? So you're saying that the United States inside of it would only make up 2/3 of?
Would only make up a third of the
Would only make up a third. So we'd have to have 3 United States, right, to make up what the size of Africa is, right? That's pretty good. Why is it that you use the United States as a reference point there?
because we know how big it is.
Okay, something that you're familiar with, right? Not because you prioritize the United States and think of it as better than any other country out there in the world. No, okay, of course not. Hadley, what did you guys come up with? The brain trust. Same thing. 3 United States, exactly the same. All right, very good. Let's go to the Speech Chromebooks up. Go to the website. We're gonna go to syllabus and handouts under global culture. And over here on the right side, I just want to introduce this to you, and you can use this on your own later. But just real quickly, take a look at it. It's truesize.com. Click on that. I believe the default is actually Africa. I think you can watch this video later on. We're not going to watch it right now, but what it does is you can click and drag different countries, and you can actually see how big something really is. And so you can see that there is the United States here, only one of them in this particular case, but I imagine you're about right when you say 3 of them. So, United States, what's this one right here? Well, I shouldn't hover over top of it evidently.
India.
And what about this one here?
China.
China. Yeah, very good. So those 3 together still don't even get close, covering up the entirety of Africa. So what I want you to get out of this is to realize Africa is huge. It's massive. Right? When it comes to transportation and moving from one place to the next in Africa, it's going to take quite a bit longer than what we're used to here in the United States. Sound good? Alright, let you mess around with that for a second while I'm getting this next activity up. Alright guys, you can go to the Home tab, click Refresh. Home tab, Refresh, and then scroll down to the bottom where it says Contact Information. We're going to take an informal introductory quiz to Africa. We're going to see how much you know about Africa, and then we're going to discuss the concepts associated with them. I'll give you just a few moments to take this true-false quiz. Again, it's down here, Contact Information. Make sure you click Refresh, please, before you click on the contact information. Okay? Alright, we're almost there. I think that we'll probably have 18 because a couple of you guys are working on it. You should have about 18. Look at that. Finish this up. Alright, once you're finished, if you would, go ahead and put your Chromebook down, your lid down, and go ahead. I encourage you to have a sheet of paper ready. There's a couple things, terminology that I'd like to introduce you today as we discuss this. And things to take note of, okay? Well, I just encourage you to take note of. There you go, Saturday evening. Probably get two more in just a second. What's that?
It's not working.
Same thing. Alright, you just follow along then. Okay. It's something about Chrome. You gotta get logged into Chrome. Can you go to your email? Go to your email. Alright, so there's 12 questions, and you can see that the majority of us either got 7 or 8 questions right. So we did a little bit better than the back on this quiz, right? You can feel better about that, right? But there's still some spots where we can have some discussion that would definitely help improve our understanding of Africa. Okay? I think sometimes we miss some of these questions because of the stereotype and assumptions associated with Africa. So, go down here, go through each one. All right. Most of Africa is tropical and covered in rainforest. This one's fairly easy. The majority of them got it right. With the easy answer explanation here, Drew.
It says I can take that.
Okay, good. Okay, so whatever score pops up last, you know that it's assigned to Drew, so take note of the top. Okay. So the anonymity there is gone. Alright, so why do we know that it's not true here? There's another big thing that takes up a lot of the northern portion of Africa. What would that be, Tyler? Okay, it's really, really dry in the northern portion because there's a big desert there. The largest desert in the world. Does anybody know what the name of that desert is? Mr. Zimmer.
You showed us a comparison between two people from Africa, and one was
Okay,
lighter skinned.
that is true. We'll get to the darker skinned one here in just a second. But this one here with the rainforest. What is it?
That one.
It's alright. What is it that was in northern Africa? That's a big desert, Miss Silvers. The Sahara Desert. You might want to take note of that, the Sahara Desert. You know, it would be good for you to know the name of that large desert there. Okay? There are rainforests. I'm not going to say there's not rainforests in Africa. Most of them are found in East Central Africa. But much more than just rainforests. All right, here's a little one. All Africans have darker skin color, and everybody got that right except for one person. And so I'm assuming that everybody remembers the conversation we had with the theme similar rather than dissimilar. We try to focus on those. And we talked about an Afrikaner is actually South African of Dutch origin, so will have a very light skin color in comparison to the stereotype of having a darker skin color being from Africa. So we'll talk a lot more about skin color in the springtime when we read the book Race. Got some really good insights from that particular text. Alright, the next, most African nations are governed by European regimes. European regimes mean like European governments. It's a reference to imperialism and colonialism, which we'll start talking about on Tuesday next week. And the majority of us got this one wrong, probably because we're trying to figure out what European regimes actually mean. So, one point in time, it's like after the age of exploration, so you got all these European explorers going out throughout the rest of the world. They figure out that there's a whole landmass between them and, you know, Asia, the Americas. And then they start to go other places, try to go around the southern tip of Africa to get to Asia. And in that process, they start developing colonies around Africa. And then almost, I wouldn't say inevitably, but eventually, they start to take control of a lot of these regions of Africa because of their ability levels with guns, germs, and steel, which is a documentary we'll look at next week as well, okay? So at one point in time they were governed by European regimes, but in the 20th century they had a lot of independence movements, revolutions, and now a lot of them are independent from their European counterparts, okay? Africa has an abundance of mineral wealth. The majority of us got that. Why did somebody get this? What told you that this was true? May I have any reference points? This is, for me, surprising that you guys answered this correctly. Miss Folks?
I heard of, actually no, never mind, that doesn't.
Have you seen any movies?
I was gonna say.
Black Panther? Okay. What we got, Miss Barnes?
I think I honestly put false because usually when you think of like Africa, it's usually like a more like poverty country.
Exactly. We're gonna reference that a little bit more. You know, you see the commercials about donate this much money to help these children in Africa, and they shows you the pictures of how hungry they look and poverty stricken, and talks about, you know, references homelessness, which is a big issue there. But then our assumption is, and it's got to be all poor, okay? The reality is, though, when it comes to mineral wealth, they got a lot of it, right? Gold and diamonds. Some of the biggest gold mines, some of the biggest diamond mines are actually found in Africa. The next one. The richest man in history was an African king. It kind of contradicts that idea that the answer is true. Right? The richest man in human history in all the world was actually an African king. Okay? And it's not even close how much more wealth he had than the next guy on the list. Okay? We assume that, again, that there's no money in Africa. But at certain times in history, there's a lot of wealth, a lot of money in Africa. And I think it's probably going to come back as well. Africa has had no history prior to European colonization. I throw that in there because we're going to talk about that a little bit more in the spring. It's really justification for exploitation. Let's talk to Mr. Glick this morning about that idea. This idea is kind of created by slaveholders a lot of times. Okay? Africa's a country with Nelson Mandela as the president. Most of us got that right. It's not a country, it's a what? It's a continent. It's got a lot of countries inside of it. So hopefully you figure that out first off. And then Nelson Mandela, he's a really important guy. We talk about him with active nonviolence. So maybe you're familiar with him because of that. But it is sad to say Nelson Mandela can't be true because he's no longer alive. He passed away a couple years ago. Okay? He was the president. He was the first black president of South Africa. South Africa, not Africa the continent. Africa's about the same size as the United States. Good thing that you can retain information for a few moments. Everybody got that one true? Most African men tend to marry more than one wife. We didn't do so well on this one, okay? So we got to write down some terms, right? Learning opportunity for us. Okay? Does anybody know what it's called whenever you have one man and you have many wives? One man, many wives. Miss Folks? Polygamy. Let's write that word down. Poly, P-O-L-Y. That prefix means many, right? Or more than one. Poly, P-O-L-Y. Gamy, G-A-M-Y. Polygamy. Okay. Now, again, this is reflective of a stereotype of Africa. Sometimes students, when they look at Africa, they think of Africa, they use this terminology of tribal, right? That they're made up of tribes, okay? And so we got to be careful when we use that term because when we make a comparison, if we compare like a tribal culture to the American culture, then automatically we raise ourselves up to a superior standing. And say tribal culture is down here, right? We use the term like they're uncivilized, and we're civilized up here, okay? And going along with that mentality, we say, well, they must practice this, weird rule where they have, multiple wives, right? Something different than what we have, okay? That must be like part of their tribal social norms. Okay? So that's completely false. Now there are some cultures in Africa that do practice polygamy, right? But if you really think about it, there are some cultures here in the United States that practice polygamy as well. All right? I think it's, at least in the past, students would shout out Sister Wives, like a TV show off of there you go. So we got one reference, or one person that knows what I'm talking about. Okay? So it does happen. Now, is that the norm in the American culture? No, it's not. Same idea with Africa. It's not the norm. Okay? But there are some cultures that do experience that. Now, what's the opposite then? What is it that we practice? If it's not polygamy, what is it then? Raise the hands, Mr. Folks. Monogamy. So that's spelled M-O-N-O. The prefix mono means one, right? Monogamy. G-A-M-Y. Monogamy. All right, before we go on, there's actually some cultures out there in the world, and this is really exceptional, where there is one wife and multiple husbands. One wife, multiple husbands. Okay? And that's called polyandry. So you may write that down. Polyandry. P-O-L-Y. Again, multiple. Andry. A-N-D-R-Y. So we need to differentiate those three terms. Polyandry, polygamy, and monogamy. Sound good? I'm going to add two more words to this. And the reason why is because the similarity with the prefixes, it doesn't really relate to marriage relationships though. Okay? Sometimes when we look at cultures and their belief system, we put them into two different categories. One is called polytheism. Polytheism. P-O-L-Y, again, that's many. And then theism is a reference to gods. Right? So in this particular case, their belief system incorporates the practices of worshiping multiple gods. Okay? And then there's another category. Instead of worshiping many gods, they would have monotheism. So M-O-N-O. Theism, worship of one God. Okay? So when you look at belief systems and religions, which is a big part of culture, they can usually be put into one of those two categories. Polytheistic or monotheistic. So I want you to make sure that you're familiar with those terms as well. Sound good? Any questions about those?
No.
No, we're good. Yeah, let's move on. So hopefully we can change our mentality on this particular question and get it right the next time around. African political and economic affairs have little interest to the rest of the world. Only half of us got that right. Why is it that we make a mistake on this one? Evidently we think that what goes on in Africa just stays in Africa and really doesn't affect us over here. Right? But the reality is what is it? We haven't picked up on one of our themes. What theme contradicts this idea? Ms. Silvers.
That we're interconnected.
We're interconnected and interdependent. Right? Just because we have an ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, that separates us doesn't mean that we're immune to what goes on in Africa. Right? So I get these daily emails, give me news events from around the world. And over the past month, there's been a recurring theme. There's an incident that's going on. There's an event, an issue that's going on in Africa that we're all concerned about. It happened once before, a couple years ago, and now it's back. And what's different about it this time is before it was kind of confined to the rural areas, and now it's actually spread to a metropolitan hub, which means that it's going to spread, has the potential to spread even faster. Does anybody know what I'm referencing? It's Ebola. Exactly. So don't you think that Ebola could be a concern for somebody here in the United States? Could be. They had somebody brought to the United States, I remember the last time, and there was a whole spiel about, confining that particular individual to an environment where they would not spread the disease that way. Okay?
You know why at doctor's office, every time they ask, like, have you been out of the country and stuff like that?
There's reasons for that. Alright, drums are the primary form of communication in Africa. You, like last hour, failed miserably on this. Alright, again, this fulfills that stereotype that if you're from Africa, you've got to be poverty stricken. But do you know how they communicate in Africa? What they use? They use cell phones just like you and I do, right? Last hour they were like, Words, letters. Yeah. No, they use cell phones, and they probably use them to a greater extent than what we do, right? Meaning that you use it to check your Snapchat stuff, right? And they use it to run their businesses. Okay?
That's kind of good.
So they use it as probably a tool more so than what we do.
But like some parts of Africa, like they don't really have that type of stuff.
Oh, so you're assuming still, even though I told you that they don't have cell phones. No.
No, it's just that Chloe went a few years ago to Africa, and she said some of the parts like didn't have like what, like all that type of stuff.
Right.
Really,
So
I'm not assuming.
in my perception, I'm probably making the assumption. Were they on the mission field?
I think so.
Okay. So sometimes when that happens, they're going to go to one of the remote locations in Africa, where you're probably going to see some of the situations like polygamy, like we referenced before, right? So it's a small percentage, a smaller percentage than what is found in Africa, but you're going to see some unique situations, right? The problem is what we do is we see that and then we apply it to everybody. But the reality is that cell phones are just as common and prevalent in African cultures as they are here in the United States. Sound good? The last one, most Africans speak several languages, and that is true. Just make a reference here. How many languages do we speak? One. We have a tendency to just limit ourselves to one language. Mr. Folks?
I read a book, and it was like about child slavery in Africa.
Uh-huh.
And it was like these two brothers were tricked into working on a cocoa farm.
Uh-huh.
And it said they spoke French and English.
Mm-hmm. A lot of times it's because of the colonizers, right?
Yeah.
And then what a lot of times happens then as well is they will actually speak, I hesitant to use the word tribal, but there's different tribal languages, right? And they not only speak their language of their family, but also the language of other communities around them as well. And so they get sometimes 4, 5, 6, 7 languages, right? which is really impressive because the cognitive ability when it comes to being able to juggle these different languages in your mind, it's really impressive, right? But then, we sit back and we got one, right? And we say there's no need for us to learn another language because the one that we have, we say it's the right one, right? And everybody needs to succumb to our needs, right? It's hard enough. Maybe that's the explanation. Okay. All right, you got just a few moments here to finish up class. I'll get by 3 questions going in a second, but I do want to remind you, we got the African map quiz on Wednesday. There are links on the website. Again, they're broken down into different sections. If you haven't started checking those out, you need to make sure that you're getting on top of that this weekend. Remember, I discourage you cramming the night before. In this particular case, it's not going to work well for you. This is probably one of the more challenging ones. Yep, because there are 50 there. You have that, and then in addition to that, I don't want you to forget, on Tuesday when we get back at the beginning of class, we'll have a quiz on part 1 of chapter 1 with Factfulness. Okay? So you need to make sure that you read those 10 pages. Then you go back and reflect upon those 10, or I think there's only 6 or 7 questions there. See how well you do on those 6 or 7 questions. If you haven't checked out the videos that are attached to the website under Factfulness, the one about the washing machine is a good one, and the other one is on the statistics. It kind of references the graph that's on the inside cover of your book. I do encourage you to take a look at that. Take about 15 minutes to look at one of those videos. All right, 3 questions before we go.